Welcome back to the Naughty Corner. I can't lie, today's episode will probably be the most disjointed in the series, as we're going to take a look at police and protester behaviour and attitudes between the 10th of February and 2nd of March. Also, because the report doesn't say a lot on this topic, we're going to throw in anything else that doesn't really fit neatly elsewhere in our breakdown series. The report tells us that from the 11th of February, police aimed to contain the protest and maintain law and order while planning for a larger operation to end the illegal occupation. Preventing a breach of Parliament was the highest priority. The style of policing adopted sought to build trust and de-escalate the situation, with any actions to be reasonable and proportionate. To that end, the police planning team developed a three-phase concept plan involving negotiation, disruption, and the eventual termination of the occupation. Under a section titled "How did the police plan to manage the occupation until it was brought to an end, and was it appropriate and effective?" we learn a little of the police's post-Feb 10 plans. The Wellington District Planning Team was formed in the initial stages of the police's response to the occupation. During the first few days of Operation Convoy, creative name, the team was engaged in activities prioritised by the local commander. The planning team was initially tasked on the 12th of February with creating a plan to clear Molesworth Street and Parliament grounds, a scheme which would become known to police as the Deliberate Action Plan. Which is good because undeliberate action sounds like an old person with incontinence. The team developed a concept plan for a three-phase ongoing operation, as we covered in the previous episode. Firstly, negotiation, then if that didn't work, disruption, moving cars, upsetting and disrupting supply chains to further encourage negotiation, and then ultimately continuing negotiation through to a final operation to bring the occupation to an end. Now this might be a bit bold, and it's my own opinion, not something found in the report, but having looked at the effort put into negotiation last episode, I'm not entirely convinced that it was ever really part of the game plan. Carrying on. Although police established a national operation on the 15th of February and set up a major operations centre, the planning function for the police response to the occupation continued initially to be led by the Wellington District Planning Team. Following a 4-hour planning meeting at Police National Headquarters on Saturday the 19th of February, the Deputy National Controller decided to hold a 2-day MOC strategy planning workshop. The workshop was held on the 21st and 22nd of February, attended by 14 police staff including officers with experience in both public order policing and Armed Defender Squad or Special Tactics Group tactical planning. The workshop was also attended by a representative of the New Zealand Defence Force with expertise in planning. As well as a tactical plan for clearing the grounds around Parliament, a strategic plan for the national operation entitled Operation Instructions, Operation Oversight was developed and signed by the National Controller on the 28th of February 2022. The operation instructions set out a 5-stage operation to conclude the occupation. Stage 1, to continue the current security arrangements. Stage 2, to begin immediately upon the signing of operation instructions, and involved activity to cause fatigue within the occupation, gather intelligence about their tactics, continue negotiation, and seek concession and engagement from central government. Stage 3, the selection, stage travel and training of additional personnel required for the execution of Stage 4. Stage 4, the deliberate incremental forced removal of structures and vehicles from the affected area, as well as the removal of people who are unlawfully in the area of protest. And Stage 5, the consolidation of protest environs. So within 10 days they went from negotiation and restoration of peace to deliberately forcing fatigue and physical removal. Also interesting to note is that the 4-hour planning session where a workshop was requested took place before the Advanced Police Negotiation Team attended their one and only meeting with protesters and promptly threw in the towel, as we discussed last episode. Regarding negotiation, I'm skeptical of it as a genuine objective. Disruption, on the other hand, I could be convinced. Unfortunately, details on the actual instances of that disruption would have to come from outside the report, because while disruption and intentional fatiguing may have been talked about broadly as a tactic adopted by the police, there is no mention of how it was executed. This is even more unusual because negotiation got a whole big section written up about it, but as we saw above, it was only ever part of the plan for 10 days out of a 23-day occupation. Playing in the background currently is an infamous instance of police disruption, where a man called Phil was gouged in the eye and beaten badly. No mention of it in the report. You can go back and see for yourself. If you're interested, trawl through the countless articles that were published at the time and you'll see the movement of bollards and removal of amenities was almost always done under the cover of darkness, perhaps in line with the plan to deliberately fatigue protesters. There is one very minor allusion to such an incident in the report. In a section close to the end detailing the seizure and disposal of property from the 2nd of March, we find the following passage. Apart from the towing of a few vehicles and a small amount of property such as a few tents removed on 10 February and the showers on Stout Street seized on 28 February, no further property seizure occurred before 2nd March. The Stout Street shower incident on the 28th of February took place just past midnight and involved police using sledgehammers to destroy a shower block that one individual had set up with his own resources to help keep protesters clean and hygienic. In fact, politicians and media often aim derision at the protesters due to squalor, but during the occupation the Wellington train station toilets were blocked, the pickup of rubbish was barred on a number of occasions, and other ablutions were denied the dissenters. In a similar vein, the Prime Minister called the occupation a COVID camp, due to people exhibiting cold and flu-like symptoms, but her Speaker of the House had turned the sprinklers on her camping guests during a typhoon, which certainly couldn't have helped their health. Keep in mind the shower smashing incident took place 3 days after the High Court had upheld a group of police and defence force workers' bid to show that a COVID-19 vaccine mandate unjustifiably infringes on the country's Bill of Rights. This is something the police force must have been aware of, as they were one of the two parties directly affected by the ruling. So police continued to sow deliberate disruption amongst a group that had been and still were standing up for the rights of those same police, rights the courts had just ruled were unjustly infringed upon. We could be getting into conjecture now though, so back to the report. There is a strange dichotomy regarding the police's plans that is never addressed in the report, because while they talk about sowing disruption, they also talk at length about a return to peace. To me these things seem mutually exclusive, but it comes up a lot as you can see on screen now. It could be seen as an implication that protest was no longer peaceful, and so opposition to it was justified, though no details of instances are given. That might make it something along the lines of Joseph Goebbels' famous quote, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it." Goebbels was of course the Nazi propaganda minister, so this would not be a very flattering comparison. More charitably, its repetition could be a tacit admission on part of the authors that the protest was peaceful, and so antagonising actions such as those we discussed taking place on February the 10th were unjustified and had led to the protesters being more honorary in disposition. One passage in particular that would lend credence to this view is in paragraph 459, where a member of the Advanced Police Negotiation Team is quoted saying that their initial focus included constant communication so that the protest could remain peaceful. Since the APNT started the operation on February the 13th, you might interpret that as implying it had been peaceful up until that point, including during the events of February 10th. There is a little other discussion about police and protester conduct in the report, for instance a section questioning if police did enough to secure public access to the courts. At one point they claimed the underground car park was filled with human waste, that protesters urinated into the water feature on the Court of Appeal grounds, and would wash themselves and their clothes in that same water. Firstly, that sounds insane, but secondly, there's no mention of charges or evidence in an age where everyone effectively has a camera in their pocket at all times. If it's true, find and arrest them. No one wants that kind of behaviour apart from the criminally unwell. So instead of speculating on such highbrow claims, let's turn our attention to the attitudes that were being evoked on both sides of the thin blue line. First, the protesters. The IPCA interviewed 60 individual protesters and representatives of protest groups, including activists and social media influencers. Of these, 38 were individual protesters who complained to them about police actions or were friends, relatives of the complainants. These 38 individuals ranged between 17 to 74 years and had been at the protest for between 2 to 23 days. 14 were present on the 10th of February, 15 were present on the 2nd of March, and 13 were present on both these days. There were common views expressed by the protesters they interviewed as follows. Protesters were law-abiding New Zealanders who were suffering under the government's public health measures. Many of the protesters present were professionals who had lost their jobs and some even their homes. Not all protesters were unvaccinated. Almost all said they were protesting the government's radical actions, such as vaccine pass requirements and especially the vaccine mandates. They said these actions were dividing society. Protesters did nothing violent and were innocent. Some admitted that other individual protesters did act violently, namely by throwing bricks. They said they did not condone this, but these actions were only in retaliation to police aggression. Protesters felt they were vilified by the media and police. They were adamant they were lawfully on Parliament grounds. Some said they could not be trespassed from public property. Several said protesters had been given permission by Ngāti Tama to be on Parliament grounds, and others by the diocese to camp on the grounds of the cathedral. Many said they had interactions with individual officers, mainly those on Parliament grounds. While a few officers did not respond or made nasty comments about protesters, they said most were friendly, pleasant, professional, and doing their job. They had casual conversations with them. Several protesters gave these interactions as examples of good policing. Some said they could tell some officers did not want to be there. They said they saw some with tears running down their faces. A few said they were personally helped by individual officers on the 10th of February and 2nd of March. Protesters nevertheless said the use of force by police on the 2nd of March was shocking. They described police actions as indiscriminate, brutal, unjustified, and unlawful. Protesters said they had lost trust and confidence in police. Several said that even now seeing police officers frightens and traumatises them. A few said their disrespect for the Commissioner and that he should resign. Many said they would no longer report crime or seek protection or assistance from police. Protesters said it was very wrong of the Prime Minister and members of Parliament to refuse to speak to them. They said this had a big impact on their behaviour and on the outcome. Meanwhile, on the other side of the line, we've discussed a few of the police opinions detailed in the report in previous episodes. The belief that political pressure had led to the call for the Feb 10 operation, the feeling from the negotiation team that they were being poorly supported, or a recruit feeling pressured to drive while exhausted. Speaking of the recruits, remember back to our first episode of the breakdowns where the report admitted recruits had quite enjoyed their cordon duties and engaged positively with members of the public. Well, 3 paragraphs later and we find one of them talking about how unpleasant their experience was by the end of the protest. One march was horrible. From the minute we walked out, just getting booed. All sorts of stuff being like hurled abuse at you. They were angry. It was feral. Yeah, it wasn't very nice at all. It was very hostile. Could be that disruption and fatiguing was working as intended. The report also acknowledges there was a change in the previously peaceful era of Parliament and stating, the nature and scale of the protest changed during this period. While the protest environment was initially predominantly calm, there were aggressive elements from the first night that became more pronounced over time. However, there was more than just sentiments of irksome dissatisfaction within the police ranks. It appears there was considerable disapproval of the decisions made and actions taken by the force during this protest. While this was only hinted at in the report, it was confirmed in the findings of an OIA showing resignations within the New Zealand Police were up as much as 50% from the previous 4-year average for both February and March 2022. They voted with their feet and left a career that doubtlessly cost them considerable sacrifices to obtain. And on that cheery note, join us next episode as we start to draw our breakdown series to a close in the first of a 2-part look at the events of March 2nd, the final day of the protest.